it is all one.
A new consciousness is developing which sees the Earth as a single organism and recognizes that an organism at war with itself is doomed.
And I wasn't born Richard Alpert, I was just born as a human being. And then I learned this whole business of who I am and whether I'm good or bad or achieving or not. All that's learned along the way.
Wie de naam van de Heer lastert, moet ter dood worden gebracht, moet door de voltallige gemeenschap worden gestenigd.
Waartoe mensen in staat zijn. Ja. Dus als ik het niet op mezelf betrek, maar het overal zie, dan zou dat een goede reden kunnen zijn voor iemand die niet direct betrokken is, om te kijken wat mensen voor een beesten zijn. Ja.
Fault of this agreement, the American Constitution will eventually be obsolete.
The old appeals to racial, sexual, and religious chauvinism, to rabid nationalist fervor, are beginning not to work.
Het gaat over Allah en God, hè. Laten we nou gewoon eerlijk zijn, hè. Dus het godsbegrip van het christendom is totaal anders dan het godsbegrip van de islam.
In Egypt, we know much about the solar messiah. For instance, Horus, being the sun or the light, had an enemy known as Set, and Set was the personification of the darkness, or night. And, metaphorically speaking, every morning Horus would win the battle against Set, while in the evening Set would conquer Horus and send him into the underworld. It is important to note that dark versus light, or good versus evil, is one of the most ubiquitous mythological dualities ever known, and is still expressed on many levels to this day.
Dat zei de man ook heel terecht. Je moet nadenken, nadenken, nadenken. Je moet je geweten volgen, maar je moet je ook je geweten laten vormen. En dan zeg ik dit als heel concreet iets erbij. Dat je geen geweld, ook niet verbaal geweld moet gebruiken. Dat uitgangspunt altijd moet zijn, om het maar weer met een geëikte begrip te zeggen, respect en tolerantie, waarbij tolerantie meer is dan onverschilligheid.
We find that Christianity was in fact nothing more than a Roman story, developed politically.
Christianity, along with all other theistic belief systems, is the fraud of the age. It serves to detach the species from the natural world, and likewise each other. It supports blind submission to authority. It reduces human responsibility to the effect that God controls everything, and in turn awful crimes can be justified in the name of a divine pursuit. And most importantly, it empowers those who know the truth, but use the myth to manipulate and control societies.
Holland had become more interesting as a country since the murder of Pim Fortuyn and Theo van Gogh.
Yes.
Why do you think so?
Well, partly the events were very interesting in themselves, of course, and partly because they seemed to be emblematic of something that was happening in the whole of Europe.
So you said at the beginning Holland had changed, the whole Western world has changed since 9/11, of course.
Well, I think the debate has changed. I think, if you like, people have woken up a little bit from what was a rather pleasant dream.
Glamour ist, das habe ich nach langer Zeit gelernt. Ich habe immer geglaubt, Recht und Logik gehen zusammen.
Wer hat das Recht, wer hat die Logik?
Ja, ja.
On est stupide. Ça veut dire qu'un juriste doit apprendre par cœur son texte et ne pas réfléchir, et ne pas avoir de cœur, ne pas avoir de tête, et surtout pas avoir d'âme ni de conscience. En fait, c'est ne pas reconnaître la règle de on se réunit et en âme et conscience, avec notre meilleure volonté, on essaie de comprendre une situation. C'est très consternant.
To do any of these 10 things, he has a special place full of fire and smoke and burning and torture and anguish, where he will send you to live and suffer and burn and choke and scream and cry forever and ever till the end of time.
But he loves you.
He loves you and he needs money. He always needs money. He's all powerful, all perfect, all knowing, and all wise. Somehow, just can't handle money.
You might want to ask yourself why the entire culture is utterly saturated with mass media entertainment from all sides. The last thing the men behind the curtain want is a conscious, informed public capable of critical thinking, which is why a continually fraudulent zeitgeist is output via religion, the mass media, and the educational system. In 1783, America won its independence from England. However, its battle against the central bank concept and the corrupt, greed-filled men associated with it had just begun. And in 1913, with heavy political sponsorship by the bankers, Woodrow Wilson became president, having already agreed to sign the Federal Reserve Act in exchange for campaign support. And 2 days before Christmas, when most of Congress was at home with their families, the Federal Reserve Act was voted in, and Wilson in turn made it law. Years later, Woodrow Wilson wrote, in regret, Congressman Louis McFadden also expressed the truth after the passage of the bill. A world banking system was being set up here, a superstate controlled by international bankers, acting together to enslave the world for their own pleasure. The Fed has usurped the government. Now, the public was told that the Federal Reserve System was an economic stabilizer, and inflation and economic crises were a thing of the past. Well, as history has shown, nothing is further from the truth. The fact is, the international bankers now had a streamlined machine to expand their personal ambitions. For example, from 1914 to 1919, the Fed increased the money supply by nearly 100%, resulting in extensive loans to small banks and the public. Then, in 1920, the Fed called in mass percentages of the outstanding money supply, thus resulting in the supporting banks having to call in huge numbers of loans, and, just like 1907, bank runs, bankruptcy, and collapse occurred. Over 5,400 competitive banks outside of the Federal Reserve System collapsed, further consolidating the monopoly of the small group of international bankers. Privy to this crime, Congressman Lindbergh stepped up and said in 1921, "Under the Federal Reserve Act, panics are scientifically created. The present panic is the first scientifically created one, worked out as we figure a mathematical equation."
Now, in our culture, we've been trained for individual differences to stand out. So you look at each person, immediately it is brighter, dumber, older, younger, richer, poorer, and we make all these dimensional distinctions, put them in categories, and treat them that way. And we get so that we only see others as separate from ourselves in the ways in which they're separate. And one of the dramatic characteristics of experience is being with another person and suddenly seeing the ways in which they are like you, not different from you, and experiencing the fact that that which is essence in you and which is essence in me is indeed one.
Wait a minute. This is important evidence. So where did that come from?
Op de eerste plaats, het zijn hele ernstige teksten. Dat zegt mij al, het gaat over hele ernstige zaken. Laten we het niet verdonkeren manen. Maar ik moet ook zeggen, gedragen of gesteund door een primitief godsbegrip.